Hey, John, how are you this week?
Hey, Elliot. Sad and angry, but I'm sure most people are as well. And I know that we're typically going to give people updates on direct AML or AML related items. But I think, as we both talked about before the call, this is an issue that needs some referencing. And I know our AML community has always been committed to doing what they can on a number of topics that address societal woes like trafficking and elder abuse. But you and I have previously talked about domestic terrorism, and there wasn't a more clear example of that, in my humble opinion, than yesterday.
Yeah, I think that's right. While domestic terrorism by itself is not actually defined in the federal law, the FBI certainly has a guideline description that they use, and if you look that up, you'll see that the events of this week certainly fit, within it. Again, it would be up to a court in the end to make that decision, but it's not there's not a lot of space between the guidance definition and the acts that we saw laid out.
No, that's right. And obviously part of it in terms of what our role, if any, in this space to detect and prevent and report has to do with the financials, and that only comes if there's planning. So while obviously there'll be a lot of investigations on the various groups that we're aware of that could have planned this, and there's certainly been media stories that suggested and pointed to social media posts that showed there was planning. In terms of what we can do as a community, it's not completely clear, but I'll say, I had a conversation with Dennis Lormel, who I had a separate conversation with months ago for one of our podcasts about domestic terrorism. And he said, he's taken yesterday's activities and going to use that to improve and enhance his training, because he figures there's some things that'll come out of this that will help going forward. So I think that's where, that's where the quote, the opportunity, unquote, lies for us to be helpful with our law enforcement partners.
Right. And again, I hope that we never see anything like we saw this week, but that doesn't mean that there aren't individuals and groups out there who view it differently and who are actively trying to plan things. We've certainly seen some arrests and some other related things that would have fit the definition of domestic terrorism in the last 6 months. So there's no question that trying to isolate the topologies and look for things that just don't make sense and reporting them accordingly is what the AML community can do on an ongoing basis to help keep things heading in a rational direction.
Yeah, and I, going forward, today was also the day where incoming President Biden named his Justice Department team, and he's going to nominate Judge Garland, as the Attorney General. And in his brief comments today, Judge Garland talked about specifically domestic terrorism, because he was one of the prosecutors in the Oklahoma City bombing in the 90s. So sadly, there's a connection. But he mentioned that in his comments. He also said something that I think is very important. He mentioned the rule of law is not simply a turn of a phrase. So I think the Justice Department will obviously focus on this as an area that needs prosecution, investigations, that sort of thing. Director Christopher Wray, back in 2019, identified this as a priority for the Bureau, and he issued a statement this morning, and I'll just read us a quick portion of it. He said, "The violence and destruction of property at the Capitol yesterday showed a blatant and appalling disregard for our institutions of government and the orderly administration of the democratic process. And as we've said consistently, we don't tolerate violent agitators and extremists who use the guise of the First Amendment to incite violence and wreak havoc." So I do think that's going to be another thing to watch. And the incoming Congress, House and Senate, both, I believe, will look at potential legislation to put domestic terrorism as a defined term under Title 18, which I think is woefully lacking, and many agree on both sides of the aisle is needed.
Right. Just for our listeners who aren't familiar, Title 19 is really the federal criminal law.
18. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. 18. No. I'm 18. 18.
Yeah.
You said it correctly. 18. I do think it is a hole. For many years, probably people didn't perceive it as a critical hole, but we've certainly seen some things over the last number of years and months that would indicate that maybe that's a hole that has to be filled pretty promptly.
Yeah, I don't think it's any question. And I think just on a final note, I would say, it's very important as we hit this new year, new administration, and try to deal with the aftermath of this disgusting activities yesterday, that we recognize that at the end of the day, we're all Americans. We need to work together, but facts do matter. And I think us in the AML community, we respect that. And we just need to continue to do what I think we always do, and partner with our folks in law enforcement, the regulators, other parts of the private sector, and do the most we can to detect and hopefully prevent some of these activities going forward. And I just think there's just another thing to add to the list of priorities for the AML professional now in 2021.
Agreed. Well, stay safe. You're a lot closer to Washington than I am. So first, stay safe. Secondly, we'll look forward to people coming together and looking for a better path as we go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Elliot. We'll talk next week. Take care.
Yep. You too. Bye-bye.